Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm talking about a series called Legends that was released from DC Comics in 1986 through to 87 and ran for 6 issues, plotted by John Ostrander, written by Len Wein, illustrated by John Byrne with inks by Carl Kessel. The story is basically Darkseid, who's content on his own planet, is a little frustrated with Earth. Every time that he goes there to try and take over Earth, he's thwarted by the superheroes. So he's got a new plan in effect that says, you know what? I'm going to destroy the superheroes. I'm going to have the public themselves turn their backs against these superheroes. Not only will they destroy the superheroes, they will destroy the legends behind these superheroes. And without these legends, the people of Earth will no longer have any hope or inspiration, and it'll be ripe for the picking. So he sends this guy, Glorious Godfrey, to Earth to mentally manipulate the public into distrusting and disliking the superheroes, and it goes really well. The public no longer trust them. They want to outlaw them. They incarcerate them or execute them. Just get those superheroes off of our planet. And in fact, there's an order from the president himself that says, superheroes are banned and they are to be arrested or detained or shot on site. So we have this story where the superheroes say, okay, part of the problem now for the superheroes is, what do we do about this? Do we, still act as superheroes, or do we follow the rule of the law? And there's some questions there. I mean, Blue Beetle begins to question what he should be doing, as does the Guy Gardner Green Lantern. Billy Batson, who's Shazam, a certain situation comes up where he feels that, by transforming into transforming back into Billy Batson, that the electricity from that change actually killed a supervillain, and now Billy Batson's afraid to ever turn into Shazam again because he doesn't want to murder anybody, although it's been a bit of a setup. And Superman himself says, you know what, President, this is your executive order not to be a superhero. I will not be a superhero, and, he's no longer going to participate in this. So this is how the story goes, and it goes on for 6 issues. And ultimately, spoilers here, they find out that, the public has been somewhat mentally manipulated. The public turns around and says, hey, wait a second, superheroes aren't all that bad. And Glorious Godfrey and his parademons and warhounds, they're all thwarted, and Darkseid says, oh, well, maybe another day. And that's the end of the story itself. Was it was all right. Let's talk about the artwork. John Byrne's artwork was good on this, and it does elevate the book a bit, because I like John Byrne's artwork, and he's on his game here, and he's good with personal, expressions, faces, working with people. What's missing from this is there's no big grand scenes. There's no grand locales or strange, mechanical devices, which I think he works well in. This is because it's about the people revolting against the superheroes. It's very urban. It's very contained. So we don't get any of those big, science fiction, fantasy, illustrations that he's done in the past that I really like. So as much as I like John Byrne stuff, it doesn't really showcase entirely his skill level and what he can do. Still, I like to see his artwork, so that's good for that. As far as the story is concerned, nothing really happens. I think that there were some missed opportunities here. The only one that sort of, is truly affected by this, and it's not even because of this, is because of Billy Batson when he thinks he's murdered or killed a supervillain. And it turns out that, he's been manipulated as well. But his fears about turning into Shazam again because he's afraid that he doesn't want to kill anybody again, that's sort of explored a little bit in here. Some of the other ones, like Blue Beetle and Guy Gardner, they thinking about quitting. Okay, and says, maybe I should give up, being a superhero if this is the situation. And that's as far as their thought process goes in this series before it comes to an end. So the best I can say is that they're thinking about it. Batman, of course, doesn't care. He says, I do my own thing anyways. The one where I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity is also with Superman. He says, okay, this is a presidential order. I'm not going to be a superhero. What if we put him into a situation where a train has run off the track and is falling down into a ravine, and if it's allowed to fall, it's going to kill all the passengers on board. But Superman has an opportunity to be the hero and to stop the train from falling and save all those people. Well, now he's somewhat in a quandary because he's not supposed to be a superhero based on what the president says. So does he save these people? Does he break the law to save these people? And then it comes down to, he will. It comes down to a question of, does he, start to examine things through his own morals and ethics as opposed to what somebody just says is the right thing to do. So there is some possibility for a discussion there. But unfortunately, none of these characters do that. None of them really face up to what it means to give up being a superhero and to deal with the public here. So it's just a very plain story. It doesn't have a lot going for it. Now, concurrent to this was a 22-chapter series of Legends. It was like a tie-in, and a tie-in with a number of other books. And perhaps, in some of the action or the Superman books, there was a discussion where Superman had to face that sort of thing. But I didn't read all the 22 chapters. I barely read any of them. I only read this 6-issue series, and there's none of that here in this 6-issue series. And there should be. It should be a self-contained series. If you really say, you need to read these other 3 books before you get to, say, issue 4, then stipulate that that's part of what's going on, and then it's not really a 6-issue series. It would be a 9-issue series. But there's none of that. It was just, here's the 6 issues, here's the story, read it, and it should be fine to be read. And it is fine to be read, but it's just really nothing exciting, and nothing really changes with these characters, nothing new. We'll get to that. But they don't really go through any kind of these moral or ethical quandaries. And in fact, I'm a little disappointed because I know little about Glorious Godfrey, and when he first shows up, I thought this was going to be a little bit more about his charisma and his rhetoric that was going to convince the public to turn their back on the superheroes, and he was going to, milk that and feed into that. I didn't know that he had massive powers of mental manipulation, and that's how he was going to get these people to change their tune about superheroes. So it's just really a mental manipulation. They're not really going against the idea of legends and superheroes. They're just being mentally manipulated to do that until they get to the end, and we discover that that's the case, and they sort of walk away in a daze, like, I didn't even know what was going on. And even that's wrong. I mean, I think Batman points out and says, well, there must have been a kernel of something within them to say that they don't trust superheroes for that to allow it to happen. But it puts all of these people off the hook for anything they've done, including, they've killed other people in this guise of this mob mentality that's been mentally manipulated, but they're given a free pass because of the manipulation. So the story itself, as I say, it's really not all that exciting. It was fine. It was good to see the John Byrne art. It's not something that I'm going to recommend because I don't really think there's a lot here. Having said that, though, I'm going to talk a little bit about the collecting and speculating on this sort of thing, because as far as the collecting is concerned, you got 6 issues, John Byrne artwork, and so there's that. There's all of these different characters that show up throughout the series, including, not here on the cover, but you got Dr. Fate, Phantom Stranger. Wonder Woman makes an appearance, actually her first appearance post Crisis on Infinite Earths, and this falls in between that time where some of the titles hadn't been released yet. Wonder Woman #1 hadn't been released yet, so that's coming up. So there's all these other characters that are in here, and if you're specifically on characters, you'd find a lot there. Now, the weird thing about the spec and investment, I wouldn't say investment, but I would say spec, is that here, issue #1 is the first appearance of Amanda Waller. Now, Amanda Waller is, it's 40 years now, and she's a big part of, well, a significant part of the DC universe. And she's been running the Suicide Squad and Checkmate. She's made an appearance in films, in the Suicide Squad films. I consider her, a major supporting character. But there's just like no reaction to the fact that this is her first appearance. When Felicity Smoke from Arrow, the TV series, made her debut on Arrow, all of a sudden those books from Firestorm, they shot up to about 20 or 30 bucks a piece. And it's Felicity Smoke. Does anybody even remember who she is? But her books went up in price. But this Amanda Waller stuff on issue number 1, there's nothing, like no bubble about this, nothing happening here, which surprises me. So that's why I say when it would be a spec, I would have normally have said, yeah, this is a decent spec book because it's the first appearance of Amanda Waller, but nobody seems to care. You can probably find this still in a dollar bin. So issue number 1, first appearance of Amanda Waller. I'll show you these covers as well. As you can see, the mob's all getting and gathering up around them and saying, hey, we don't trust you legends anymore. The next spec book, though, and again, this is one of those things that, just sort of disappears again. This is the first appearance of the Suicide Squad, the new Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad originally was just 4 regular people going on impossible quests, and they dealt with, giant serpents and bombs and things like that. And this happened way back in the Brave and the Bold. I have it written down here somewhere. And there we are. 1959 is when the first Suicide Squad showed up. And as I say, just 4 regular people going out and handling impossible situations. No superheroes involved here, and none of this idea that the Suicide Squad is now, where half of the team is made up of criminals, and maybe even more than half, and if they complete the task, then they're given a reduced sentence or even let off the hook. So this is the first appearance of that brand of Suicide Squad, when they're up against Brimstone, issue number 3. But again, nobody seems to care. This is the first appearance of Suicide Squad, and I would be saying, oh, well, here's a spec book, but it just, there's very little movement on this book. Again, 40 years old, Suicide Squad, movies, the series has been gone on, great series by John Ostrander that followed this, and we'll get into that some other time. But really, there's just so little buzz about the first appearance of the Suicide Squad. Here's that Glorious Godfrey guy. Not fair that they didn't tell me anything about this guy. I thought he was just, a regular charisma guy, but he's not. He's mentally manipulated. And we've got Shazam comes back. When he does come back, it's funny because, he's got the wisdom of Solomon or something like that. And he realizes he's been manipulated once he becomes Shazam. But when he was Billy Batson, he was still like a little kid and he didn't put all the pieces together. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. So, and then we get to the final issue number 6. And again, this would be the lightest of the specs, and I wouldn't even necessarily call this a spec, but this is where the new Justice League forms by the end of this book. Again, that's like saying the new Avengers team forms or something like that. Not a big deal, but here it is in issue number 6 when we get that new team. So there's a couple of what I would have considered spec books, but this entire series can be pretty much bought in a dollar bin. It might cost a little bit more. Somebody might recognize 1 and 3 as being something and put a $3 to $5 price tag on it. But really, they're just so incredibly inexpensive. I would still consider that. I think sometimes that the DC universe is overlooked, or it just, people just aren't as focused on it. Yet you take a look, and the DC comic, of course, Action number 1 selling for $15 million, and Absolute Batman just racing up the charts of the hot topic, both DC properties. But some of the stuff that's in the middle of the pack in the 80s and stuff like that, it just goes by the wayside, and nobody's really paying attention. So if I'm a spec, I'm going to be looking at issues 1 and 3. I would still pick one up for $1 or $2. I don't see any problem with that. The story, as I say, not really all that interesting. It was an okay read, but it's not something that I'm going to recommend. A little disappointed on my part. I expected to see something a little bit more meatier, especially with all this talent involved, but it just kind of fell a little flat. So as I said, there was a 22 chapter sidebar, that sort of sidebar that went along with this, and included in that was a mini series within the 22 chapters, and that featured Cosmic Boy. So I'm going to mention Cosmic Boy only because I think this is the only time that I will get a chance. I picked this up when I bought a bulk purchase, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, maybe more. And there was all 4 of these issues in here. And I know absolutely nothing about Cosmic Boy and had to look up, other than the fact that he's wearing the outfit of a 1980s aerobics instructor. I knew nothing about Cosmic Boy and his girlfriend, Lyda, who goes by the clever name of Night Girl. So we got Cosmic Boy and Night Girl, and they're featured in this Legends thing. They've come back to 1986 to go on vacation and have a burger and enjoy things that are going on. And they discover that history has not lined up the same way that they're familiar with. I should point out the Cosmic Boy himself first showed up in 1958. So this is nowhere near his first appearance. So he's been around for a while in Legion of Superheroes from the 31st or 30th century, something like that. And as I say, he's come back in time to go on this vacation, and he finds out all of this stuff about the superheroes being, ostracized, and says there's something wrong with the history here. Let's look into it a little bit. So they try to look into it a little bit, and they say, hey, this is just not working for us. Let's go back home, and find that they can't go back home. They're being stymied for whatever reason. This is them being pursued by some of the citizens, and this is them getting stymied in the time stream. Anyways, they do make their way through the time stream. Oh, I'm sort of spoiling the whole thing, and they come up with the what's his name, time trapper, at the end of time, and they deal with that and say, okay, so this is partly why history's out of line, is because the time trapper has something to do with that. That story will continue somewhere else. All right, so this is where we're going to go for this. This was written by Paul Levitz and illustrated by Keith Giffen and Ernie Colin. So it's all about, the Cosmic Boy. Does it have a lot to do with the Legends? Not necessarily. Just that this guy happened to be back on a vacation while all of this was going on. Does the whole time bubble thing have a greater effect? I don't know, because once again, I haven't read all 22 chapters. This one, these 4 parts of that story, that 22 chapter, seem to have absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the Legends. A couple of run-ins with some of the citizens, but that's about it. It's pretty much its own self-contained 4-issue miniseries set within the framework of Legends. And is it any good? Actually, it was all right. Part of me is interested to see, what the whole Time Trapper was about and where this is going. I'm not that interested that I'm going to go out and hunt down the books that follow this one, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad introduction to Cosmic Boy and Night Girl. I don't think there's a great lot of personality development or anything like that. I have no desire to read about these characters from the 31st century, but it wasn't a bad little mini-series within the mini-series. Is it essential to Legends? I don't think so at all, because I didn't think there was a lot going on there. But it was a fine read. So overall, a little disappointed in Legends. I'm in no hurry to pick up the 22 chapters to find out what I might have missed. Artwork was fine by John Byrne. A couple of spec books in there that just nobody's paying attention to. The Amanda Waller at number 1 and the Suicide Squad at number 3. I would still buy those, because most of this stuff you can still find in the dollar bin. I should, change this to dollar bin diving sometimes, because some of these books. Anyways, that's what I got to say. Be good to yourself. Be good to others. And we'll talk again soon.